think we are still going to have some folks trickling in, but we can get started with our introduction. So hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Addie. I work as a youth engagement specialist with the CEI, and I am thrilled to be your host this evening for the first of a 3-panel series on youth well-being in the workforce. So before we get started, it's important for us to acknowledge that the CEI is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. At the CEI, we strive for respectful partnerships with all the peoples of this province and take responsibility for learning and seeking long-term transformation in our relationships with Indigenous people and the land. For those of you unfamiliar with the CEI, what we do is we work alongside communities to strengthen the development and delivery of employment services in Nova Scotia. And we do that through various activities, partnerships, projects, and research. The idea for this panel series emerged from a number of conversations we've been having with partners and from repeated themes coming from our research. It has become clear that, particularly since the start of the pandemic, mental health and well-being are a top concern for youth and employers alike. This panel series will address some of the key questions we've heard from employers and service providers and answer the call for more information. We hope that you, our audience, will come away with further knowledge about the context of youth well-being in the workplace, as well as with recommendations for incorporating practices that support well-being into the work that you do. Today's panel is focusing on one theme in particular, which is supporting the mental well-being of young professionals in an online work environment. And we are very grateful to have 3 wonderful panelists with us today who each have a great deal of knowledge to bring to the table. I'm going to introduce them now, and then we will jump right into the questions that we have planned. So following our core questions, you'll have a chance to pose your own questions to the panelists as well. So if you do have something that you'd like to ask, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, not the chat, and we'll get to those questions in the final 20 to 25 minutes. So our first panelist this evening is Stacy Smith. Stacy is a Dalhousie kinesiology graduate. She was co-chair of the Youth Advisory Council of the Youth Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Services Review conducted in New Brunswick. She has ample expertise in the mental health and employment sector, as she is currently working for Motivate Canada as the research and evaluation intern. She is also the co-executive director of the Young Canadians Roundtable on Health, a member of the CEI's Youth Advisory Group, and is attending the University of New Brunswick in the Bachelor of Education program. Our second panelist is Tess Etienne. Tess is a recent 2020 graduate of Acadia's Masters of Education and Counseling program. She currently works as the Mental Wellness Coordinator at Edge on Employment, a program designed to support youth in finding meaningful employment. Tess has a passion for working with children and youth and obtained her master's degree in early childhood studies from Ryerson University in 2016, where her focus was on advocating for the rights of children and youth across all walks of life. And our third panelist tonight is Hailey Vidler. Hailey is a public engagement professional with an academic background in development studies and social sustainability. She's currently focused on stewarding the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative. Through this effort, Hailey and her colleagues are exploring overall life satisfaction, which highlights the connections between work-life balance and mental well-being, and how they relate to experiences of social connection, time adequacy, and affordability. She is looking forward to sharing youth-related data and personal perspectives about this important topic. And on that note, I will jump right into our first question. So we are 2 years into the pandemic, and 2 years for a lot of people into online work, at least intermittently. For some youth who are new to the workforce, this online environment might also be the only one they're familiar with. Stacy, I'm hoping you can start us off with this question by sharing your experience as a young person who was thrown into this online world of work, and what some of those challenges have been for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for the warm welcome. It's great to be here to chat about my experience. So before the pandemic, I actually really didn't have experience working remotely, working online. So being thrown into it that quickly, not even just with work, but with the end of my kinesiology degree at the time, was very new environment, very new experience. So it's definitely difficult not being able to see your coworkers, your employers in person, being able to connect in person. Virtual, you still get a chance to connect, but it's different than that in-person experience where you really get to socialize, get to know one another. So that was tough. Some of the jobs I've actually not had a chance to meet them the entire time I worked there. So that was definitely a tough situation as well. Another challenge that I also had was just trying to keep motivated, staying on task. I found that was definitely something tough to do because you're not around other people that are there to motivate you. You're not around really anybody, it's just you. You can have so many meetings with your employers, with your coworkers, but still, the aspect of being in person in an office is definitely a bit more beneficial for someone like me over working from home in my room, or my living room. It can sometimes be tough to stay focused, but I feel like over the past 2 years I've been able to improve on those skills, learn how to time manage, learn how to stay focused and motivated, since I feel like this method of online work or even hybrid model, I think it's going to be the way we move forward in the future, because you get a lot more opportunities that way. But it's definitely been a learning experience, and I feel like there'll be a lot more things we can learn about it in the future.
For sure. Thanks, Stacy. And Tess and Hailey, on the other side of things, I'm wondering what challenges you both have come across, either while supporting young people in online work environments or in your research. And maybe I'll throw that to Tess first.
Sure. I am in a unique position because I work from the mental health perspective while they're exploring career opportunities. And so one of the big things that I've seen with online work is I have some clients who come to me and they say, I only want to work online. I have really bad social anxiety and all I want to do is work online. I have other clients who in rural Nova Scotia, they don't have access to online as easily as what we think of when, we just jump on our family computer and access the internet right away. So I'm left wondering, at what point is the online helping with anxiety for some clients who struggle to connect in person? And at what point does that become a motivating factor for them actually not to push themselves outside of their comfort zone, which is something I've had to discuss with a lot of my clients, that, you're telling me that you want to make these social connections, and online when you're working, you stay at home, and not only are you at home, but you're in your bed and you're not getting up and you're not getting into these routines of I'm going to work now. It's I'm opening my computer. And so I've noticed a struggle when they are in person. That ability to keep their focus is a struggle. Their ability to plan their breaks appropriately has been a struggle for a lot of them. And just their ability to connect in person with other adults or working people, it becomes a really big struggle for a lot of the clients that I work with. And yet it's opened up so many opportunities for clients that may not have gone out and found themselves an in-person career because of their social anxiety. Now they've had the experience and they are more willing to go out and put themselves out there and go to job interviews. So like anything, there's always two sides of the coin.
For sure. Thanks, Tess. And Hailey.
Thanks, everyone. Two sides of the same coin for sure. I feel like I personally hold many of those. I feel like it's like a more of a dice. I never know what day, how I feel about it. But as Addie said in the opening, I'm going to bring some personal perspectives as well as some research perspectives that we're seeing. And so personally, you know, when I think about this, I'm a young person who had to transition to working from home most of the time, and now we're in a bit of a hybrid model. And I'm an absolute extrovert. I'd like to say like a recovering perfectionist and highly, highly anxious. And so I really struggled with that. And similarly, where I also support, I'm a senior staff on a pretty young team, just internally grappling with what I was feeling comfortable with, while also navigating how the team really wanted to show up for themselves, for each other, because I was so excited about the accessibility and the flexibility it was bringing to my life, to many people's lives. But I always wanted to be like, don't you just miss it? Like, don't you just miss being in person? And how can you hold kind of multiple truths at once around both how you support your needs, but also that transition from being such a relationship-based organization where we spent so much time in circle together and conversation. Much of it was very like casual, getting to know each other, building that trust. And a lot of that felt like it was just kind of taken away. And you know, additionally, when I have my professional hat on in this, because of who I am, I've built a career where what motivates me, what energizes me in my workday is that magic that happens when you gather people, you know, whether it's just your team or it's in a room of people. And so to have that kind of taken away kind of threw me for a loop, mental health wise, no doubt. And I kind of had to reorient, okay, am I in work just to give myself energy, or is it to also like, where can I bring energy to those who need it, and how now? So that was really challenging personally, you know, and as a team. And I'm excited to kind of touch on some of what we came up with and some of the other questions and conversations that we'll be talking about today. And then from a research perspective, and it does really shape, you know, we wear multiple hats. I feel like mine's just like a large stack. I'm never taking any of them off. But as an organization, so I work for 𝐸𝐥𝐞𝐲 Nova Scotia, a nonprofit. We work on mainly what's called the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative. And so in short, it's about, we're kind of on this journey to redefine progress, one that better balances, you know, social issues, environment, and also our economy. So where a lot of these kind of like work conversations come in. And we asked people in the survey in 2019, essentially across 230 questions, you know, what really matters to you? And that's everything from education and health and living standards, like affordability, but also these really lovely pieces that we know make up a good life. So time with family and friends, time to yourself to be creative, being out in community, being connected, socially connected. And while this was done in 2019, we know, especially for vulnerable populations or sometimes exploited populations, that, you know, the vulnerabilities that existed in 2019 were only exacerbated during the pandemic and in this kind of transition we're all in. And youth are actually one of the main demographics that we're researching right now through this information, and one of the main demographics I've actually always engaged with in my work. And so this morning, and I can bring some of it, but I thought it would just be an interesting framing to bring into the fold of today's conversation. I was specifically looking at youth under 30 who reported that they had low mental well-being. And some of the key issues that came up when I looked at that profile, and it's not just data, it's real stories, right? It's real experiences of young people, is that they're having trouble meeting basic needs. They have low time adequacy. So it's not even just time management, it's actually not even having the time. They have lack of trust in institutions, are experiencing discrimination, and are being socially isolated. And I know we're talking about that today, which really excites me. And so just to wrap up my kind of opening remarks and answer to this question around how that actually all connects to transitioning to working online, is that I think we know, as a young professional and as professionals in general, most of our day and our time is spent with colleagues, it's spent working. And these issues are taken into our workplace. And one thing that we're also realizing, and I think a lot of us intuitively know as well, is that in many cases, our work-life balance, our workplaces are actually contributing to, low time adequacy, mental health issues, our ability to meet basic needs. And so that's like a framing that I'm definitely bringing in around, not only are we being personally challenged in workplaces, it's also kind of more on that macro level. What are youth issues, in general, and that were only, exacerbated in the past 2 years. So I'm also curious about other people's perspectives on like cameras on, cameras off, flexible work schedules, but I'm sure that will come out throughout the rest of our conversation.
Thanks, Hailey. And I think you set up our next question kind of perfectly, which is that one of the key challenges we've been hearing here at the CEI from young people is the struggle to set clear work-life boundaries when working from home, particularly since a lot of young people don't have access even to like a separate home office space to work from. So we're wondering, how can we support young people in setting meaningful boundaries around work online? And maybe we'll start with Tess this time.
Sure. I love this question because I also had to transition from school to online. So I went from in-person counseling to online counseling with no previous experience with online counseling. And one of the things that we talked about was these spaces that we hold sacred and are our recharging stations. We're now in a position where we're giving and we have to kind of switch gears a little. So how do you balance? I'm in my home, I'm in my safe place, and now everybody at work is exposed to my safe place. And it's really hard. And for some of the clients that I work with, they don't have the privacy of even their own room. So how are you able to have a conversation with a boss or a colleague, and there are maybe 3 or 4 other people running around, and pets and animals and people that are reliant on you for basic needs like getting their meals ready or taking the dog out to pee? It's really, really hard. And so the idea of creating boundaries, I think, becomes very overwhelming because we think of boundaries as these big things. One of the best tools that I used when I was counseling online was I put on work shoes every day. It was the smallest thing, but it switched something in my brain that, because I don't think many people walk around their house in, either heels or anything like that. And if you do, that's awesome. And all the power to you. I think that's great. But for me, I like to be barefoot or in fuzzy socks. So the act of putting on my shoes was enough to create a sense of, okay, for the time being, this space is no longer the space that I recharge. It's the space that I give myself to other people. And then as soon as the shoes were off, it was kind of like the switch flipped back and it was, now I can relax. So creating boundaries that are accessible to us and recognizing that boundaries are personal. Some people have no problem having their background on, and then other people, they will always have either a blurred background or one of the preloaded ones. And those are all ways to help balance how much of ourselves are we willing to give to a job that at the end of the day should not be our only identifying factor. And so it's about talking to clients about what is important to you, what are your values and morals, and how can we respect those while still being able to give what your employers are asking you to give. And if it's too much, then that's a whole other conversation that we need to be having.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tess. Hailey, do you feel like going next?
Yeah, sure. I really appreciate what Tess said around like boundaries being also so personal and so unique to your needs as well. And I think it's about fostering, in the workplace, open communication around those needs. And that takes a really long time to build that trust with your colleagues, or say you're in a bit more of a managerial or executive role with your staff. Because I think a lot of young people, and my organization really we try to challenge, like, what does it look like to have a relatively flat-ish organization and have a really, person-centered learning culture. And one thing I've experienced, both as a young person coming into that organization, I've been working there almost 6 years, and seeing young people come in since I've been there, is, there's actually these expectations that young people come with around like hierarchies, and it's all around personalities too. And I just want to recognize that this doesn't, go across the board of all workplaces. But I find that some young people, though we want to also challenge those, are pretty used to, like, you don't question the way things are done, that's just not what you do. And so we've tried to really create open lines of communication and connection, and actually talked about boundaries, but not in a way where you explicitly have to communicate what yours are all the time, to the whole team. Those are really personal preferences. And so when I think about, some of those boundaries, or maybe what my team's done, is we've actually created daily check-ins. I think this will come a little bit later as well. And when I talk to some of my friends about this, they think, what a nightmare. And on some days it is, right? But it's actually just this space. We used to create actual physical spaces, and now this is just a space where you can come in and you can talk about whatever you want. We have a half an hour as a team. And some people come in and they talk about what they watched on TV the night before. And that's been a really nice way for us to connect, because it's that typical office talk that kind of happens off the cusp, right? So later you can say, oh, I've been watching that show too. And sometimes it's actually a space where people come in and say, I'm really overwhelmed. Like, it's just not going to be my day today. I'm shifting some things around in my calendar. I need support on this. We kind of do personal check-ins, and then we do these like quick operational check-ins. So if you actually just need support on something. And what that's done is like created these opportunities that you're not obligated to do, for you to talk about your kind of boundaries or your needs in that day. And what's been really nice about that is, on some of these kind of like time management pieces, there's this book, I listened to an interview, I didn't read the book, but it's with Oliver Berkman, and it's like time management in the modern world. And it's this idea that we have 4,000 weekends, and just, he talks about this thing around like existential overwhelm and an efficiency trap. And in these check-ins, it was just this really interesting perspective of what people were going through, pandemic, all the things that have happened. I don't need to say the long list. And people were really overwhelmed, not only with their work and the expectations on them, but like with the world around them. And what one of my colleagues had said, and created this incredible space for her, and she just said, let's pick one thing and then you pick the next. Because the more that you feel, and when you're like kind of left in your own house as an anxious person, for example, I'm like, I need to be as efficient as possible. But when you do is you create this efficiency trap where the more you clear off your plate efficiently, the more it adds to it. And the more you can kind of get caught in this cycle. And so she just said, do the first thing, take a breath, take a walk, do the next thing. Maybe that's going to take you like 10 minutes, maybe it'll take you all day. But she would often say, we're a nonprofit work, there's people who do this, but she would say, we're not saving babies. Like, everyone's having a tough time right now. And so that really helped me to like build that trust with my team and create my own boundaries as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Hailey. And Stacy, we'll pass it to you to finish off this question.
Yeah, I feel like everyone's had some great things to say. I guess from a personal standpoint, I think this is something I still need to work on. I'm also someone who wears many hats, not only just in employment, but also in some of the volunteer work, especially with the YCRH. So I feel like it's something that I need to learn how to do better. So just turning off my phone at the end of the day, making that conscious effort to not check my email. I'm really someone that tells people that, oh, like, you can always reach me, but I think that's something I need to take a step back from, because I feel like I'm either on the cusp of burning out or already have burnt out and I'm just not admitting it yet. So I feel like that's something that's from my own personal experience that I need to do. And it's tough too, because I do everything at my same space, in my own same space. I don't really like going out to, other spots, coffee shop, library, or something like that. I like to be in my own space. So I feel like that overlap's been tough, and it's something that I could also improve on. So, a few of those things I think are great tips for folks who not only are working, but doing volunteer work, because it's called volunteer work. You still need some of that, some of those boundaries in place, to be able to not end up burning out.
Awesome. Thanks, Stacy, and thanks everyone for the answers to that question. I think you all had some really wonderful suggestions for things that we can sort of promote to our younger workers as maybe more sustainable ways of working from home, which is really wonderful. My next question for you folks is, so we know that mental well-being is supported by strong communities and by individuals feeling like they belong within those communities. And so 2 years into online work, many of our young professionals haven't had a chance to experience that type of community that is built through in-person interaction in the workplace. And Hailey, I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm wondering, how can we foster community and a sense of belonging in our workspaces when we aren't physically in the same place? And Hailey, you haven't started a question yet, so I'll pass it to you.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to give a go at this, because I think, like I said in my opening, it's one of my favorite things to do, and my ability to do it has been greatly challenged. I think one experience I had a few months into it, when started, we all went online, and all of a sudden there was all of these softwares that you could use to connect with people, and they were really fun. And part of it is that trial and error, just try something. If it works for your team, check in with why it didn't work. If people aren't showing up, make sure you're just asking, what's going on? It's totally okay, but why aren't you showing up? And so we were having a lot of fun with those, I think, along with all the other people who were baking bread and, doing these things in the first few months. And then both with those I'm doing public engagements with and also my own team, there was a bit of this kind of overload, right? Overload of possibilities, overload of new technologies, overload of softwares and whiteboards and so on, some of which I use, many of which I don't now, because it was actually about stripping it back and, what are we actually missing here? And it was that connection. And so when I think about this piece, it's about making sure you're being really clear about the purpose of why you're gathering people and getting their input on how they want to be convened. And so I'm sure we've all heard many stories. And like I said, our team did, right? Some people tried mandatory games days on Fridays. And it's funny, in preparation to this conversation today, I asked some of my friends, I was like, did you enjoy those? When your workplace asked you to show up at a games day on a Friday, and it mixed responses. And I think what the mixed responses actually shows is you're dealing with so many different personalities and people who actually, for them, work is just work. And that is okay. Work doesn't have to be a place of purpose and connection, even though we want to make sure for those who need that, it's there. Kind of like what you were saying, Tess, earlier, just all these different personalities. And so I think it's important to be really clear about the purpose of why you want to create social connections at work. And so I was actually thinking about my favorite gatherer. Her name's Priya Parker, and she does a lot, the art of gathering. And so whether it's in your workplace or public engagement community, and everything down to a dinner, if you're just gathering a dinner, what's a good way to do that with friends? And so she was really active in writing a lot throughout these shifts in the way we come together, right, as teams and so on. And actually, just the other day, a newsletter landed in my inbox, and it was about this transition back to hybrid, some people going back into the office, the beauty of online work. And she talked about this point around connection and how, it's so much of it is about how we navigate personal connection and how important it is. And she talked about this idea of collective mechanisms. And so I'm just going to read it because she obviously will say it better than I can. But she said, collective mechanisms are structures, and sometimes they're designed or they are emergent, that help a group coordinate in really relevant and appropriate ways for the good of that group. And what's really beautiful about connections, like we've talked about, is they can reduce inequity, exclusion, and sometimes when it comes to teamwork, just like individual coordination time, right? Like sometimes those off the cusp connections are actually really helpful for doing good work. And, I was thinking about what I talked about with the team around daily check-ins. That one's huge. Or when I was living in Sweden, there's this piece that's built into the culture, both the community culture and the work culture, and they call it fika. And it's this time for half an hour at 2 p.m. every afternoon, where you come out and you have coffee and a sweet with your workmates or out into the community. And it's really nice because it's actually this recognition of how important that break is, how important that social connection time is. And I think when I think about those social connections piece, I think about what you said, Tess, around, drawing it back to just the personal needs and like the psychological safety of people, young people included, is, that's not always comfortable. But when can you also encourage people to take part in that, even when it's not? And so that's what I've been thinking a lot in terms of, that lack of social connection is sometimes you just need to spend the time in creating that supportive and trusting work experience for that person to then want to step into that invitation when you make it.
For sure. Those are some really great points, Hailey. And maybe let's go to Stacy next.
Yeah, I feel like it was tough to do this during the pandemic, especially where some of us were actually working outside of, our home cities. We were kind of able to go and work from wherever we want. So it'd be tough to really have that sense of belonging since we really all weren't in the same spot. This is particularly true for the YCRH, where we're all in different parts of the country. So we actually also did a games night that a lot of folks were really excited about online virtually, which is really cool. We only had a small group, but with the group we had, it was really great to get to know one another, just be able to have a fun time together. If you get a good group that's really into the event, I think that's when it's kind of a great thing to do. If we had people who weren't really into it, who just came for the sake of coming, it may not be as beneficial of an event, but just having the folks that we had, it made, the sense of belonging really great. And even if we aren't physically in the same space, I think later on, once we could actually, go outside, go kind of be in smaller groups, that's something that you could do too. I think having just like a very socially distanced lunch outside. I know that's something that we've talked about a little bit. And actually with the work I'm doing right now out in Vancouver, we're finally able to meet up together. So I feel like knowing that you get the opportunity to meet up in the future, I feel like that you're able to still find that sense of belonging in that way. Not sure if that makes sense, but I feel like that's just kind of where I'm seeing it. And once we all kind of have common goals and things like that, I think that also helps foster community within the organization, having similar beliefs, similar values. I think that helps too. So yeah, that's kind of how I've been able to see things.
So thanks, Stacy. And that leaves Tess for this question.
Thanks. I love like being able to discuss these things with so many different people and points of view. So thank you to the other panelists, because as you're talking, I'm like, oh my God, I've never thought of that. Or thank goodness I'm not the only one who's thinking this. This question to me actually made me think of what we perceive as connection, because there are a lot of people who are with individuals all day. And at the end of the day, they don't feel like they've connected with them at all. And this pandemic has also made us wonder, how do we reconnect with things outside of that social connection? How do we reconnect with nature, with things that recharge us, that are for us? So when I saw that question, I really went to, what are we connecting with? What does connection look like for the youth? And why does it look that way to them? So for some people, this online platform is the best way to connect because they can be anonymous and they can be more genuinely themselves. For other people, connection looks like physical touch. Like I need a hug and I need to be able to feel that you're with me. And so that's impossible to do via a computer screen. So it's about having these conversations once again. What is important to you? What are these values that you hold so dear, and how can we acknowledge them and try to help foster them? For some people, a connection, feeling connected to your work group might be you guys, your job for the next hour on a Friday is to not talk to each other. Go and experience something that's just for you. And so you can bring it back and talk about it. Work cliques are a thing. They're even more present online, I feel, because the people who know each other outside of work, they'll be in group meetings and they'll be messaging each other privately and someone will laugh, or you can see the people looking at their phone and smiling. It causes a lot of anxiety. So we need to really acknowledge connection for individuals is about feeling seen and feeling acknowledged. And that looks very different from person to person again. So my takeaway would be just question how do you feel like you've connected with someone? How do you leave a personal interaction and think, okay, that was a really beneficial connection, not just I was in the same room as you. We can be in the same room on our cell phones all day and I will leave and I probably won't think of you again. But if we talk about something I'm passionate about, or if you acknowledge something I've done for employers, like just sending out an email and saying, I noticed online, like you were so attentive and I really appreciate that. Or these messages of gratitude and appreciation, that's a connection. That tells employees I'm being seen and I'm being heard and I'm thankful for that. So the idea of connection, again, it's probably going to be my theme, is very unique and personal to each individual.
Awesome. Thanks, Tess. All right. So our next question is, when we talk about physical health, we often talk about prevention. So that idea of being proactive instead of just sort of actively responding when there's an imminent crisis. So we're wondering, are there things we can build into our online environments to help us be proactive about addressing mental health struggles? And let's start with Stacy.
Yeah, this is kind of a tough question. I feel like not intentionally, but a lot of the employers that I know of haven't really built that in. And again, I don't think it was on purpose. I don't think they've thought about it. I'm hoping employers will start doing this more, but I mean, I think just having that open communication that you can talk with your employer if you're having difficulties, and that they're able maybe to provide resources or point you in the right direction if there's services offered by the employer themselves, resources in your community. I think having that open communication from the beginning of a job, I think that's really important. And even having the option to take a mental health day, that's been something that's been talked about a lot more, especially during the pandemic. And being able to take those without feeling guilty, without having to explain yourself. I think that's a big one, is having that confidentiality. You don't need to kind of get into the big details of it, because some employers still want to know why you're taking time off, whether it be a physical ailment or a need for a mental health day. But I mean, you're able to maybe talk about the fact that you're having a struggle with your mental health on a surface level, but not get into those details, just so you can have those conversations. Obviously, if you're comfortable and want to get into more details with them, absolutely, but it gives you the option to not have to do that. And even another kind of key thing that employers could do is providing the option for virtual counseling options as part of a healthcare package or benefits or something like that. That's become more of a more often utilized service. One service that I've used personally as well. You're able to talk to somebody more quickly. You're able to access it more quickly. And your employer may be able to cover some or all the expense. So I think that's another great option too. But it's a tough question because in an online environment, you aren't in that face-to-face option like we've been talking about. You're not able to just have that in-person interaction where you're able to really sense how the person's feeling, their demeanor. So having those conversations may be a bit scarier and a bit more nerve-wracking, but on the other side, it might be more comfortable because you're not having to be in person. I feel like there are two sides to that. So, and when you're talking about preventing your workplace from adding additional stress, I mean, we talked about setting boundaries, you know, not taking on more than you can handle, not putting too much on your plate, something that I haven't learned yet. So I should take my own advice. And just know how much you can take on, whether you have other commitments outside of work, like volunteering, or if you're in school. Ensuring you have that open communication with your workplace so you're not taking on more work than you can handle. So yeah, again, I should probably take my own advice, but alas, I have not yet.
I think we could probably all do with taking that advice, Stacy. Tess or Hailey, does one of you feel like you're ready to go?
I have a very tangible thing for this question, and it's let your employees keep their cameras off. I don't know why it's such a big deal. Like, that shows lack of trust that your employees aren't there if their cameras are off. But from research that I've read and been doing, the actual act of staring at yourself on a computer, we've seen an increase in eating disorders in young children. Depression, anxiety, that is all fostered by just having your reflection staring back at you all day. So a very simple thing to help with the mental health decline that we're seeing because of online is trusting your employees enough to be like, you know what, you don't have to have your camera on. I believe that you want to be here enough that you are going to show respect for the fact that there's a meeting or that we have a guest speaker or anything like that. So that in this question, it was a very simple, just give them a little more leeway. And employers have to lead by example here. I know they have so many other things that they're doing, but if you send out a quick text at 8:30 at night because it popped into your head, that's telling your employees, oh, if I think of something, I can do that to a colleague. And then that colleague is already in a heightened state and I need to deal with this now. So the rules have to swing a little further the other way and say, your job is 8 to 4. And we do not expect you to do anything else except 8 to 4. And that has to be much clear. The boundaries, again, they have to be more clearly defined so the personal life can be balanced. And employers now have to kind of take on that role of fostering their employees' personal connectiveness because they're not leaving an office. To be able to, take a bathroom break and not be panicked that someone's going to try to call you while you're at home and you're going to be thought of as not working because you weren't immediately available, or someone messaging you saying, hey, do you have a quick minute to chat? And you say, sorry, not right now. And it's like, well, why? You're at home. So we, again, need to make sure that people's mental health is recognized. And that doesn't have to be these grand scale diagnosed mental health conditions. It's simply, I see you and I acknowledge that you are a whole person and you are not just a box on a computer screen. And so if you need to take 20 minutes to not do anything, I was in my office today and I spent 20 minutes sitting in a chair playing with a little sand hourglass thing because I just needed to unwind. And at the end of the day, I was like, I worked all day. If I did that at home, I would be like, I need to work an extra half hour because I did that for 20 minutes. And now people are going to think I'm slacking off. we need to encourage people to look after their mental health throughout the day, not just after work hours. And so little things like turning off your viewfinder, that's what I would say to employers for sure.
Thanks, Tess. Yeah, a lot of that resonates a lot with me as well. And Hailey.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy and Tess. So many thoughts. And as I was listening and thinking about, what I might share, because much of it was exactly what you two had said. I'm challenging myself a bit to understand some of the kind of like the old paradigms around work, because anytime that I've come up against this it's been a conversation with employers, both my own or others, you realize that sometimes, management's also unpacking, decades, if not more, of really unhealthy approaches to work and really unhealthy expectations around labor and work being a defining factor of the way we show up in the world. And so I'm always kind of dancing with that a bit, right? And both challenging it and trying to understand that unpacking of like the way you do things or you expect young people to do things. I mean, if he listens to this after, he'll understand. I'm having conversations with my dad about this all the time, right? Of that expectation that's being passed on to young people to do work that's outside of the boundaries of what they're paid to do, or should be doing, right? But that doesn't also negate the wanting to create opportunities for young people who want to go above and beyond as well, right? And recognizing that that's okay too within boundaries of your own mental health. If you want to spend some time in the evening, you've got a creative thought around your job, that's okay too. But maybe then you don't start working at 9 o'clock. So I think there's all these things and mechanisms we can put in place in our workplaces that actually recognize that and actually start to recognize human physiology and the way we go about things, right? We talked about this at my workplace of when are you most productive? And I do my best writing at obscene hours in the morning where I wouldn't expect my workplace to pay me, right? But I'm going to then take that maybe 6 to 9 blocks sometimes when I've really got to write something and I looked at emails, and I'll probably adjust throughout the week. And so it's about trust and it's about flexibility as well. That a lot of this, I think, really goes on or off online work, right? These are pretty fundamental structures that we're putting within our workplaces. And when I think about the data, I just have to say, pay your youth and everybody who works with you a livable wage / beyond a livable wage. When I look at the information and again, respect the boundaries and understand the way they show up. Maybe they do like to work in the evening. When I look at some of the data, the key issues of young people who are experiencing low mental well-being is that they can't pay for food or rent. They don't have the time to be themselves, right? To nurture that personal connection as well. They're not getting enough sleep. They don't have time to socialize. They feel socially isolated. And so we also need to understand the world in which our employees, youth, for colleagues are coming into. And I think what you had said too, Stacy, is also not expecting or needing personal details to validate why they need some time, right? And I think so much comes around that trust piece. I think additionally to this, when I think about, more of that prevention piece as well, is some of the best professional development I've benefited from is understanding how the brain works, for example, and some of our own kind of triggers or neurology around, feeling anxious and what your body needs and giving space for you to try different things out, right? When I learned that when I'm at my most anxious and overwhelmed, I can actually reset myself by getting up and going for a quick 15-minute walk. And when I worked for an employer that it not only said that was a-okay, but encouraged that, we're not just dealing with clock in at 9 to 5 and recognizing not everyone works the 9 to 5 who employs people, but kind of those typical approaches to office work or just work in general. That's been huge for me, right? When I got the permission to turn off my screen and to walk around while I'm listening, that was huge. And I think young people who are coming in and, are almost grappling with this traditional way of working, but also what's the hustle culture. And I don't think that's for me. Like, I don't know if I need to be defined by my work, or maybe I do want to be, we're all discovering ourselves in our careers. The more permission and the more trust and the more communication that our mentors are making space for, to be like, I was there too. I just think the better. So yeah, that's some of my perspectives on that. But honestly, when it comes down to it, it's pay young people enough where they're not also stressed out about all the other things that comes with this age and stage of life. And give them the flexibility and the space and the accountability structures as well. Like when I think about that flexibility and what I've been granted and what I also help to support my coworkers in is, what's a good deadline for you? Okay, how does that kind of fit in with our strategy? What does success look like for you? Ah, cool, okay, I think success actually looks like for me too. Other questions that we ask ourselves on the team are, do you want me to actually check in with you midway, at the beginning? How do we want to check in around this project? And so it's actually understanding what that person needs, which, as we've all talked about today, connects with general mental health and mental well-being.
Awesome. Thanks, Hailey. I think we have time for one more question for all three of you before we jump to the Q&A section. And I'd love to know, what is one resource, book, TED Talk, website, podcast, anything along those lines that has been instrumental for you folks in understanding or supporting youth in online work environments? Sorry, I didn't hand it to anyone to start. Maybe Tess will start with you this time.
Okay. In my particular role, one of the biggest things that I have found is to actually learn what the youth are interested in outside of work. So I spent one session where it was 60 minutes of a youth explaining to me what Skyrim was. And at the end, he was like, I don't get to talk about this with anybody else, so I feel so great. So employers, take an interest in your employees' lives outside of work. Ask them what they like to do. From a mental health perspective and a counseling standpoint, there are some really good online programs that you can use. Mindwell U is one. They do like 30-day challenges for mindfulness or getting outside and exercising. Therapy Assistant Online. Let me just double check that I'm using that correctly. Yeah. Yeah, TAO, Therapy Assistance Online. That's a great program. It has a lot of like CBT based techniques, all of these things. There are so many great board games if you are both in and out of the workplace and not online, that you can use to just open up discussion with youth about emotions or about certain ideas and concepts that they maybe don't feel like are appropriate at work, but affect them at work. So while it might not be something that gets brought up in work, if family dynamics are a common concern for a lot of your employees, bring it up and open up a space that they can actually talk about these things with people outside of their immediate circle, because that might allow them an opportunity to learn different perspectives, to feel that connectedness that we were talking about, and to also recognize that supports look different based on your needs and who you're with. So just learning to see your employee as a whole person is really beneficial. And there are lots of online tools. You can just Google online mental health stuff and it'll give you the list that I was going to give you. So that would be my takeaway.
Thanks, Tess. And I should say as well for our audience that any of the resources that our participants mentioned, we're going to be sending out after the fact. So don't feel the need to frantically scribble them all down now. Don't worry if you missed something. You will get those later as well. And maybe we'll pass it to Hailey. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, definitely. I know I already mentioned it and actually see that Joel put Priya Parker's gathering guide. I'm not one usually with authors and stuff to be like everything they say is spot on. But almost everything Priya says is spot on. And it's applicable to our lives, our workplaces. It's not so applicable, like some of it, to online. That said, in the past year or so, she's been putting out a lot of really specific resources around that online piece. So I would check it out, YouTube, the gathering guide that Joel had put in the chat, and I'm sure you'll get after. What Priya and many reminds us, and I think what we all like intuitively know, is that when we strip back to like what's the real purpose and how do we actually design to meet that purpose. And so I understand that in a lot of workplaces, you know, you may actually see your purpose of work or your organization as the end product or the service that you're giving people. But I think the sooner that we recognize that this is where we spend the majority of our life, and if we can make our spaces and design them to be conducive to our mental well-being and to social connection and to places of like growth and like understanding about our own selves. Honestly, I've been talking about this quite a bit. I'm in the kind of social change realm, that I think that's actually part of the answer to many of the issues we're facing, like on a societal level, is how do we not just see our workplaces as places of like labor and output? Like they're actually places where we can start to redefine what it means to be together as people and in community. And Priya touches on that quite a bit. So I would say anything she does.
Awesome. And Stacy, what's your resource that you go to?
That's a tough one. I feel like I also want to plug my own that I created. Maybe I'll talk about that first. So I created the Mental Health Student Support Network. Basically, it's a spot. When COVID started, it was COVID-19 Student Support Network, just to have a place for students to find resources all in one spot for mental health, and really getting a chance to chat with one another about the abrupt change to online learning on a full-time basis. I feel like it has helped a lot of these students and even young workers. It's all kind of the similar resources. So that's been something that I created again at the beginning of the pandemic, trying to really step away from the COVID focus because people are tired of hearing about it. So that's why we're more focused on that now. In terms of my own resource when it comes to understanding youth and online work environments, I think the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity, they do a lot of great work and research in this area. I've had a chance to participate in a couple focus groups when they were trying to get information for different sectors. I did some work with their youth council before and have had them on some panels for the YCRH. But they have a lot of great resources and information on supporting youth in the work sector, whether it's mental wellness or any other topics. So they're another great one to check out as well.
Thanks, Stacy. I'll echo the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity. They're a resource that I look to a lot as well. All right, so that brings us to our questions from the audience. So folks who are listening, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, now is a great time to put it into the Q&A box. So not the chat, the Q&A box. There are a few there already, so we can get started with those. And for our panelists, I'm just going to ask the question and then whoever wants to take it first can run with it. All right, so our first question is, young people have an immense amount to offer to a workplace, but often, as mentioned earlier, young people may feel uncomfortable bringing forward ideas or challenges or challenging the way things are done. What might employers do to create a space where young people feel more comfortable or encouraged to bring forward those ideas, questions, and challenges?
I have one. Like internal spaces for reflection around how things are going at your work, like at your strategy. on your kind of like internal strategies and so on. Now I say that and recognizing that the first few of those, like say they're once a quarter, the team comes together and you can think really critically about what questions you have around work or the way things were doing, where you're doing things. The first few people probably won't feel very comfortable. And so you have to think about in those conversations, how are we creating other mechanisms outside of those conversations to also gather people's input. And so that can be done, anonymously. I don't love, like, it really is when you have like more trusted relationships, but when you can frame it up as actually like a really important evaluation tool, they realize that like some of that input is actually connected to kind of the good of the organization. And I'll recognize I come to that from a very nonprofit lens. Not sure what that looks like at like an accounting firm, but that's kind of the lens that I come to a lot of this with. And I think a lot of it also comes from seeing mentorship and senior leadership in places of questioning too, right? So seeing that, oh wow, they don't wake up every day and say everything's gravy, I know what I'm doing. And so how can we actually just create those honest spaces where not all of us know what we're doing 100% of the time. And the sooner you see senior leadership do that, I think the better.
And I would just add, make positive feedback second nature in the workspace, because if you provide that positive feedback, that's going to build the trust, and it's going to allow your youth to see, okay, they recognize the hard work that I'm doing. I might feel a little more confident now to ask these questions and to make suggestions because I've received so much positive feedback. And make it about the smallest things and the biggest things and everything in between. If you notice a youth is really uncomfortable coming towards you, then yeah, send out a mass email and say, look, we're gathering just some mid-report feedback. Can you all write it? Or have a suggestion box if you need to have a suggestion box, while recognizing that some of these youth might not have the literacy skills to write criticism. So being able to gather this information with a whole bunch of different means, whether it be verbally, written, through email, anything like that. But the biggest thing that I would suggest is just make the positive feedback the focus from day one. So these youth just build their confidence and build their sense of self through your organization.
Awesome. Stacy, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like this is something I've kind of gone through before, and actually I'd say I've gone through more recently. I think it's tough because I've had some of this, recently where, because, they're older, they don't want to they think they know what the best route is to go when it comes to solving a problem or wanting to do something, and they just take it over. That's been something that's been a struggle, but younger people have a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? They have a lot more knowledge that's relevant to now rather than a long time ago. So I think that's something that they need to think about. I'm not trying to say, so-called boomers don't know what they're talking about, but we do have different viewpoints and different expertise because we grew up in this different digital age, I think is the biggest thing. So I think, having just bringing that up itself, I think it's not so much having the employers do it, but I think if we bring up, what we have to offer in terms of our knowledge of things that are in this, in the 21st century, I think that's really something that would be beneficial. And I think even just giving folks the opportunity to talk in meetings that are younger, like say if you're in a meeting with a whole bunch of big, corporate people and you're just kind of the junior employee, just have that opportunity to they should allow you to have that opportunity to bring up your ideas and opinions. Giving them the space, giving us the space, I think will give us more confidence to actually want to bring forward suggestions and ideas rather than just going in themselves. For me, I don't care what they think, so I would just say what I want to say, but I feel like I'm the minority in that regard. So yeah, that's kind of how I would see it.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. So our next question that's come in is, what expectations do you think employers need to let go of to better support youth in online work environments?
I think the biggest one that the youth have brought to me is this expectation that they're going to be available all the time because they're working from home. And so you're home, you're already there, you have your computer open, or you're on your phone all day, you are available. So again, this goes back to the boundary thing. Employers need to be able to set very clear boundaries on behalf of their staff. So the expectation is you are available within a reasonable amount of time, whether that's an hour, 2 hours, between whatever your workday looks like. Once that is done, the expectation is you will be available on the next workday for these hours. But really making sure that your employees recognize there's no expectation that you're going to answer an email at 9 o'clock at night. And if that is your expectation, I think that's a sign that you as an employer might need to take a mental health break yourself, and just recharge, and again, find that connectedness outside of work.
Stacy or Hailey, anything to add?
That was really the first one that came to mind. I think another one too, and I mean, I've benefited from this, and I recognize, again, every workplace is different in your ability to be quite flexible in your programming. But like the expectation that everyone was going to be okay during a global pandemic, you know, like a few weeks in, we had a conversation around the grieving process at work. Like, what does that actually mean? Like, what are you experiencing if you are, if you're not? So what does that actually mean in terms of, you know, your own programming? Where can you actually not be so efficient? Where can you not actually have to deliver at 100%? Where can you shift a bit? And then I say that in a youth context, especially because, you know, young people are told, and it's true, that like their 20s are the most important years of their life in terms of putting you on a trajectory, you know, and recognizing not everybody's naturally career minded. Not everyone wants their career to be their whole life. And for others, that's where they get a lot of fulfillment. And so like young people are going to put these expectations on themselves anyway. You know, sometimes even despite you saying we don't expect you to work in the evening, they might. And so how do you just, you know, I guess create the expectation that to communicate your needs, and not have the expectation that everyone's going to be okay all the time, because especially connecting right back up to that mental health reality. We know that it takes a lot for us to be our full selves, you know, and it's not always going to be perfect.
I feel like everyone touched on what I was going to mention because, you know, expecting us to work all the time. No, I can't. I feel like I'm always doing something all the time, but certain things I put to the side. A job I recently started as a research assistant, they work on the weekends too. And I stepped up and I said, I like taking my meetings to myself. If there's something really urgent, I don't mind if it's really quick, maybe during the mornings, but like Friday night, Saturday night, I like going out, being social, being with my family, friends, whatever. So that's a big one. And I think the other point that you mentioned on just, you know, having that support, that we don't always need to be on, and not be at 100%. I'm never at 100%, but I feel like I'm always maybe 90, 95. But sometimes I'm below that. I think that has to be thought about. So, and none of us are perfect. I think that's another expectation that's pretty high on us. We're young, we're supposed to be full of energy. That's not always the case. We do definitely have to remember that too.
Absolutely. Thanks, folks. All right, moving on to our next question. This question is from Michael. who says, very interesting discussion. Many of the opinions given mirror those of the feelings of intergenerational workers online. So older workers are usually not well trained in the technology of the virtual world and feel additionally vulnerable as well. So he's wondering how you folks feel about interacting in the workplace with older brackets 50 plus folks.
I'd love to start off with this one. I have two great things I want to say. My mom, she's 59, and she's not in the workplace, but I mean, I have to help her a lot with technology, the computer not working, Facebook not working. That's another fun one. So I feel like I have the experience where I don't mind interacting with those folks, especially if they need some assistance with newer technology. There's so many new platforms out there, which we've talked about, that we've had to use: Zoom, Google Jamboard, etc. So yeah, I feel like I'm very comfortable interacting with folks that are, in the older age bracket. Especially also on the opposite end, my dad is super technologically savvy, and he's 73 years old. Phone, Facebook, all that, he's really up to date. So just because someone's older doesn't mean that you can completely, pass them off as they don't know what they're doing. People do, if they take the initiative and, they really try hard to understand stuff, they can. So I think, yeah, interacting with folks that are older, you can learn from them too, because there's going to be things that they know that we don't know, and it works both ways. So it's kind of a collaborative relationship that way.
Love that point around collaborative relationship as well. Yeah, I've experienced this in my workplace. I've experienced this a lot with sessions that I need to hold, or those I'm most connected to within my networks. And it reflects on what I had said earlier around, wanting to always, I was looking at all the new shiny objects of online softwares and collaborative software, and just how can you actually bring it back to basics? Because sometimes, especially when you're looking for connection, or sometimes efficiency, bringing it back to the basics can be really helpful. And so, frankly, in the past couple months, I've been on the phone more than ever, and I dislike phone calls. I think that's a humorous thing in my workplace around how I love these, but dislike phone calls. There's something about picking up the phone that I think maybe generationally don't love to do. But the amount of times when I gave the option, do you want to do a Zoom or do you want to talk on the phone? That people were like, oh my gosh, I'd love to talk on the phone. And then you can walk and talk. You can, move your body, which a lot of the time helps with thinking. That was really awesome. And just to wrap around to say, back to that kind of co-learning piece, I've really experienced with some of my colleagues and those I work with around, almost this, yeah, I don't want to say fear of technology, but just this piece that that's just too much. I don't want to do it. And that's okay. So I think it's about just being really open and being really patient. Because as a young person, and I mean, again, if they listen to this, I say this to my parents all the time. Growing up in the digital age, we don't realize how much that just picking up of new things actually comes as second nature to us. And so I know sometimes as a young person in the workplace, I've had to actually check my own bias and be a bit more patient too, and just recognizing that that can also be a really isolating space for intergenerational workplaces to feel I can't just pick that up. Sometimes I'll do a workshop and flash on the screen and expect people just to understand how to do something. And so it's both a bias I have to check too in creating more inclusive spaces for everybody at work.
This is not my forte. I work with teenagers, and before that I worked with toddlers. So what I will say is we're all human beings. And so the connections that we can make as human beings will foster these work-related problems really well. You might have it almost a buddy system at work where, you feel like you need support in any manner. Here are all the numbers that you can reach. Here are the people that, get your employees to write their own strengths and send it out and be like, look, this is your team. here are the people that you can rely on, anything like that, but really making sure, again, that you recognize that these are human beings, wholehearted human beings, and they all have strengths and they all have something to add to your business. And it might not be technology. That might be the bottom of their list, but I can guarantee you them being on the Zoom call is adding something that no one else can add to that Zoom call.
Thanks, folks. I really like that suggestion, Tess, about having folks list their own strengths. I think that's, a really cool way to foster that intergenerational connection. All right, so the next question in the chat is from Jamie, and Jamie's wondering, what is one ask that you have for employers to strengthen more inclusive, safe, and secure spaces for youth?
Such a good question. It's a two-parter, but it is one ask. I think just going back to some of my background with the Quality of Life Initiative is just to recognize, the holistic perspectives of people's lived experiences. And to recognize that work isn't it for everyone, when I've shown some of this data, especially to people who are a bit more business minded, to show that actually work-life balance and work-life imbalance is one of the key indicators around a good quality of life and life satisfaction. And you have a crucial role in that, you're an employer. It opens a lot of eyes. Let's just say that in terms of, whoa, my role as an employer, is directly contributing to somebody's quality of life. And, within that sphere of quality of life, I should also be paying attention to things around time adequacy. Am I giving my employees time to spend with their family? Are they showing up drained of energy? I need to pay attention to that. And so just making sure that we're always applying an intersectional and holistic approach to the way that we gather, our staff and the way we show up at work. And so much of that just doesn't happen, just expecting it to happen. So much of that is in the workplaces that you design and you foster. So that would be my one ask. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. I'm not an expert in management and change and culture of workplaces, but I have some really interesting information around some of the questions you can be asking yourself.
The one ask that I would make of employers is to foster autonomy in their staff. So you might have a staff of 300 people, but they are all individual persons. So recognize the autonomy and reflect back on why you hired these people and the positive feedback. If you just get in the habit of every day a little positive note or feedback or a smile from your employer, that can change someone's whole mood and make them more productive for the rest of the day. Having that acknowledgement and the positive feedback and trusting each individual employee that you have, trusting them enough to feel like they're going to do what's best for the team and for the company. So that's more than one ask. I just asked 6 things from that, but you're the employer, so I'm going to put that on you.
I went last for a reason because I really had to think about the answer to this. I think when it comes to a secure job, I think that is something that I would think about, and being very upfront and open about that, especially when it comes to contract work. I think is one thing, whether there's an opportunity to stay on in a full-time position, something more permanent, just having that open communication, I think, is a really big ask of security. And even having that conversation around performance and, being able to have that conversation around, sorry, let me go backwards, ensuring that your employer can, provide positive feedback, I'm losing my train of thought. I don't know what time it is right now in Vancouver. Positive criticism is what I'm trying to say. So that's kind of the information that I would want from my employer and to ask of it, just so we know what I can improve on, and be able to use that information, not as a negative aspect, but on a positive aspect. I'll stop talking before I stop making any more sense.
Thanks, folks. I think we have time for one more question. And I know Joel, who's been playing IT guy in the chat, had a question that he wanted to ask. And since he is here on video, I'm just going to have him ask it to you himself.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I think I had, there were a feew questions that emerged out for me, but based on what you just mentioned, Tess, thinking about employers, thinking about just the realities and the time management that it takes to be like a larger employer, like what advice, and maybe this is for everybody, but like how can employers support like those diverse types of connections that you all mentioned and that employees need, but how can they do that with a sense of intentionality, but also with a sense of effectiveness? Just recognizing if you have 300 employees, like Tess, you mentioned, like smiling, that doesn't take a whole lot of time, but are there other pieces that you think would be useful for like those larger scale employers?
Again, I will also share some of the responsibility with the employees. A great thing to do is when they're hired, get them to fill out a form that says, how do you like to be acknowledged? Some people, it's like a love language, you know, do they like giving gifts? Do they like having, you know, quality time with people? All of these little things that you can maybe set up in place. Just offering to go out at the end of the day. It's not, we're going to take you all out for dinner and pay for your dinner. I understand that that's not accessible to a lot of businesses, but saying, we're all going to go out for dinner and there's no expectation that we talk about work, but we want to acknowledge the fact that you guys have worked really, really hard. And we want to get together outside of the workplace to just say thank you in a different setting. All of those little things. Again, the smiling, the little, if you work in a smaller business, the little notes that you can just leave for someone, or sending an email simply saying thank you versus here's all the tasks that I need you to do. Have a great weekend. It's, you know, these are some of the tasks that will need to get done. And I really appreciate how much time you're taking to successfully complete them. And I want to acknowledge that. So in any email that you send, a sentence of gratitude goes a long way.
And I think one thing I'd like to touch on, depending if it's a smaller business or a bigger business, you know, bringing in, you know, let Tim's Take 10 coffee or some small little treats. Like, it doesn't need to break the bank or anything, but I feel like that's something that a lot of employees really value, is just, you know, bringing in donuts or something like that, or some small little, you know, treat or something like that. I think that would be great as well.
I don't have much to add other than just to emphasize a piece that Tess said. And one of my favorite things to do with my new colleagues is to have those conversations, as like funny and awkward as they can be, especially if you're on a smaller team together, say that's like a subset of a 200 or so on, is that kind of like, again, within people's privacy and respecting that, you know, how do you like to be acknowledged? Some of my favorite questions is, how do I know when you're mad or like when you're stressed, and how do you want me to best support you in that? Like, are you the kind of person who just like needs to go take a breath, or are you the kind of person who wants someone to sit there with you while you figure it out? And so the more, especially with young people who, you know, are actually more well versed around mental health than a lot of older employees, like creates that space to actually communicate, oh, I recognize that I'm stressed when I do this, and here's what I need. And if they don't know, like, let's figure it out together. You know, it's just the more that we recognize that kind of co-learning, we have more of a, you know, a safer community, I think, for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you all. And thank you all so much for being here tonight and for sitting on this panel. I think I speak for a lot of folks when I say that we learned a lot tonight. I know I did. So thank you for being here, and to the audience, thank you for joining us. If folks listening have enjoyed this panel, and if you're interested in continuing to learn about supporting the well-being of young professionals, we do have 2 more panels coming up soon as part of this panel series. So on April 14th, we'll be talking about supporting the well-being of young professionals, specifically through the transition from post-secondary education into the workforce. And then on May 18th, we'll talk about building intentional spaces to foster the mental health of young professionals in the workplace. And registration information for both of those panels will show up on the CEI social media and email lists, probably in the coming weeks, at least 2 weeks prior to each panel. So we hope to see you there as well. Thank you again, everyone. I hope you all have a really wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.